An ordinance adding new sections of the Code of the City of Colorado Springs pertaining to exercise of and restrictions upon the use of the power of eminent domain to acquire property.
Councilmember Cullen.
Yes, I've looked into this issue in great length on eminent domain. And if the public isn't aware, eminent domain's been used all over Colorado. In Denver, Thornton, there's a current case going on in Summit County where we're taking people's property using eminent domain. And most of the people can't fight it because they don't have the money to hire the lawyers to fight it. A comment was made yesterday, I don't know anything about eminent domain, and I took an oath to uphold the Constitution. Constitution says you should know about your property rights. Eminent domain is included in those property rights. So I would like to propose that we do an ordinance adding new sections to the Code of the City of Colorado Springs pertaining to exercise of and restrictions upon the use of the power of eminent domain to acquire property in the City of Colorado Springs.
Second.
Councilmember Miller.
Second.
Okay, that was moved and seconded. So we have a motion before us. Do you want to, Councilmember Martin?
I won't be supporting the motion. We've had a lot of information come at us in just the last 24 hours on this, and I just don't think we've had time to adequately take a look at the long-term ramifications of this ordinance. We haven't heard from our own city attorney. We haven't heard from our development community. We haven't heard from our own urban renewal authority who would consider using this. And Councilmember Collins, I'd like you to give me an example here locally of when it was used for this purpose.
Councilmember Collins.
Okay, my research has shown there has been examples locally. One is up north. I'm not going to state exactly, but this is going on all over the country in different cities. The Urban Renewal Authority, different people are using eminent domain developers to take people's property. I am personally aware of citizens in Colorado Springs that have received letters stating they are going to use eminent domain to take their property. I do not wish to state those names publicly, but it is going on. It is a pattern. It's a pattern all over the United States. Councilmember Miller started this in January. He did receive some city attorney feedback. You were handed a package yesterday last minute by the city attorney, and if you had a chance to even glance at it last night, you wouldn't believe what he had to go through to even come up with this. He has done independent research. He's gotten guidance from elsewhere because he wasn't supported by the city attorney in doing this like he needed to be.
Okay, we have quite a few people signed up. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Snyder.
Yes, I will not be supporting the motion either. This idea has, in my view, not been properly vetted by the city attorney's office. It hasn't been vetted by some of the players in town, and it's my view that, you know, this council has not even been, as a body, instructed in all the things that the eminent domain entails. So I think it takes a lot more time to vet, a lot more time to frame the issue here. But on this particular ordinance, I will be voting against it.
Councilmember Gabler.
Given the time to fully understand this issue, I may very well vote yes on this, but I was contacted today by several different stakeholder groups who saw this ordinance for the first time today or Friday, and these are groups in our community who should have been stakeholders in the process of creating this ordinance, and they were completely left out. And so until we hear from those stakeholders, yes, to include developers, to include our city attorney, I will have to vote no on this.
Okay. Let's see, I think, has everybody in the queue? I'm trying to work the computer.
Asked, but it's not showing.
It's not showing? Councilmember Bennett. We'll try and see if we can get this working.
I
I would prefer this to be postponed and not vote on it today. I think it's bad public policy. I think it's, we've had some significant comments made by our city attorney's office of the concern that we have, and as I think my colleagues Val certainly has brought up, that it has not been properly vetted through the different groups in our community who have who need to be able to chime in on this. Personally, I believe using the term that was used yesterday, it takes a strategic tool out of the toolbox, and it's bad public policy.
Okay, I don't know, since this isn't working, is there any other council person that wants to speak right now?
I'd like to add a
Councilmember Miller.
presentation. I'd like to.
Sure.
Is this an
Sure.
appropriate time for that?
Yeah, we'll let Councilmember Miller give his presentation, and we'll take public comment. It's like it's locked. There it goes. Welcome.
Thank you. I bring forward this ordinance because I think it's needed to strengthen property rights for Colorado Springs citizens, property owners, business owners. History of eminent domain in the U.S. It's based on the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment. It says that people will not be, citizens will not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So there's a few elements there this ordinance covers. It covers the due process portion of it when you are going to be deprived of property, and it also covers what can be a public use to which this would allow in the Fifth Amendment. Traditionally, eminent domain is used for condemning land and transferring it to the public ownership, such as a road or utility infrastructure. Condemning land and transferring it to a privately owned common carrier, or condemning land to eliminate an identifiable public harm caused by the property. That whole thing got turned on its head in 2005 with the Supreme Court case, the landmark case of Kelo versus New London, Connecticut. The Supreme Court found, and the New London Urban Renewal Authority, it's been renamed something since then, but they sued to condemn property as an entire neighborhood to make way for economic development. The Supreme Court ruled that the public purpose satisfied in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution could be met through a secondary purpose, such as increased tax revenue or economic development. So it basically left no federal protections for eminent domain in the U.S., and the Supreme Court decision said as much, that states and local municipalities were free to strengthen the laws on their own. So there are 42 states that have already strengthened property rights. Colorado is one of them, and Colorado doesn't allow, as your express purpose, the use of eminent domain for economic development. What's happened, and what I found in my research, is that eminent domain isn't ever used anymore for what people say is economic development. What happens is many of the places use the term the public purpose of overcoming blight. And when you read the Colorado Revised Statutes about what constitutes blight, there are 11 factors, and 5 of them, I think we heard from a citizen earlier, on what they are and how nebulous they can be, and how easily any of our neighborhoods could be declared blighted on the basis of those 11 factors. Finding 5 of them is pretty straightforward, and the boundaries of the blight has only to do with what the person having the blight study, the conditions survey as it's now called, done. So when I ask to have a conditions survey done, I can set the boundaries of what it is. So when the blight finding comes back, if I'm part of that boundary, then I have property that's blighted. And so that is the basis for the public purpose, which is then sought to overcome that blight. They're going to have to take my property. So that's where this economic development, yes, Colorado statute covers it, but there's a wide open loophole in Colorado statute that allows this blight to be used as the basis for taking property. Generally, the way it happens with this is jurisdictions who want economic development, they can't use eminent domain for economic development, so they commission a condition survey, formerly called a blight study. Developers in urban renewal areas, they will commission the study, they'll pay for it depending on what the arrangement is. Either the developer or the urban renewal authority will pay for the blight study. And there will be a blight finding that comes back. I'm not sure of any. I don't know enough to say whether they ever come back and say they haven't found blight, but my suspicion is that these are all done by contractors, and I'm not saying that they're bad people, but I think that their customers are people that want blight found. So I haven't seen or heard of any issues coming back where one of these consultants comes back and says, no, it's not blight, so sorry. But once it's declared for large areas, the jurisdiction and the urban renewal authority can declare the area as part of an urban renewal area and come up with an urban renewal plan, which has to be approved by council here. And within the urban renewal plan, under state statute, eminent domain is allowed to overcome blight. So therein lies where we've had a lot of issues in Colorado. And while the state statute does give authority to the urban renewal authority, it has to be approved by city council. So the authority is there by the URA and the state statute, but the state statute does also clarify that the governing body has final authority on it. Okay. What it doesn't do before it comes to council, and we talked about this yesterday, is it doesn't remove the threat of eminent domain coming to a property owner. So you're part of an urban renewal authority or an urban renewal plan. Your property exists. Here's your parcel number. Through a CORA request, I believe I got 7 from the North Nevada urban renewal plan or urban renewal area that were letters which are titled intent to acquire property. So imagine you're sitting and getting your mail and you get a letter from the urban renewal authority that says, we intend to acquire your property. And there's a map and it's color coded to show where your property is and it says, here's an offer. We'd like to talk to you about this and here's some information on what we can do up to and including the use of eminent domain. So this is part of what's called the fair negotiations process to acquire property without eminent domain. So the fact that council hasn't actually voted to use eminent domain is really a moot point because right now we can have threatening letters sent to property owners that if you don't agree with the offer that's given, you are going to have your property taken anyway, or could ultimately. I'm going to skip the blight designations, but you know what, I'm going to read a few of them. The Colorado blight designations, these are some of the factors, some of the 11. Defective or inadequate street layout. So how that's determined, I'm not sure, and how the property owner is at fault for that, I'm really not sure. So if my community was planned in a way that's a faulty street layout, I'm now on the hook for a blight factor because I have a faulty street layout. A faulty lot layout, same thing. How do I draw the lot lines? Well, I purchased this knowing what the lot lines were, and even though they're faulty, it's still my property. Unsanitary or unsafe conditions. Uneven sidewalks are even cited in some of these as satisfying that factor of blight. Deterioration of site or other improvements. Fences. How many people have seen deteriorated fences in your neighborhood? If it's a cedar fence, I'd say there's a good proportion of those that are deteriorated. So is that a blight condition? You bet, under Colorado statute it is. Unusual topography. I think that's why some of us chose to live here, is unusual topography. And yet it's now a blight condition. Unusual conditions of title. Okay, so I have issues with my title And so now, because I've got administrative problems clearing the title, now my whole property is subject to blight designation. So these are the kinds of things that you could find your own property as the subject of a blight study on. This process that I described has happened all throughout the state. There's a few examples. In Alameda Shopping Center, there were 25 Asian businesses that were threatened with eminent domain. The Denver Urban Renewal Authority authorized eminent domain, and there was a public outcry, and after the outcry, this was to make room for a Walmart to take the place of these 25 businesses. So Walmart didn't like the controversy, so they pulled out. Meanwhile, all the businesses felt like they couldn't trust their government to protect their property, so many of them left, leaving real blight at this point because they left. And then the Denver Urban Renewal Authority spent $19 million to put a Lowe's store there as part of their economic development. It later left 19 months later for, I don't know if it was bankruptcy or just they couldn't turn a profit there. Longmont just ruled in December. The Colorado court ruled that Dillard's at a mall in Longmont was blighted. And if you'd go up there, you would see the mall. It looks like a regular mall. But somehow, there were blight factors that were found that basically condemned the entire mall because they want to build a new mall. And Dillard's, unlike most department stores, they actually purchase their property. And they did purchase their property. They developed it here. And they are having their property taken using eminent domain with a value that they don't think is fair. So now you've got even a powerful store, they've got powerful resources, they lost because they're blighted, and there is a public purpose to eliminate the blight. In Summit County, this was recently on Greta Van Susteren. We have Summit County saying that a undisturbed cabin that's been there for 100 years was blighted. And they want to condemn the area for open space. There's 10 million acres in the national forest, and they want to condemn about 5 or 6 acres because they want access to open space. And I keep getting the question, do we use it in Colorado Springs? How many times has council voted on it? The point is, it's been threatened repeatedly for these negotiations, these fair negotiations. I have obtained, and I think you'll hear about this a little bit later, I have obtained a letter from an attorney that was hired by a developer to a property owner stating among a two-page letter, an offer, and we want this developer wants your property. You haven't reasoned with him. I want you to know that the Urban Renewal Authority, who's interested in this property, has interest in this property, and they, the Urban Renewal Authority, resell to the developer, and you find yourself in court wondering what you're going to get. Now, if you think that's fair negotiation, and you think that's appropriate behavior for the government, and you think we don't have a problem, then I think your constituents really expect more out of us, because the fact that we're not voting it out up there does not mean that this kind of process isn't taking place. In fact, the Castle Coalition, which is part of the Institute for Justice that represented Suzette Kelo in that landmark 2005 case, they've documented more than 10,000 threats from various jurisdictions to property owners, like the one I described. This is like pointing a weapon at someone's head and saying they negotiated in good faith for your purse. Allowing the city to use eminent domain gives a strategic tool in the toolbox. That strategic tool in the toolbox is a figurative loaded weapon to a property owner to broker fair negotiations. This ordinance still allows the use of eminent domain for traditional public purposes. I went back and forth, and if you read through the two-inch stack of papers, you'll see things that got added back into the ordinance after they were removed several times, including cultural centers and a number of other things that I don't consider traditional public uses. If you do, then you won't support the ordinance. But what I'm bringing forward is its traditional public uses. I did not agree with open space or trails being a reason why you could take somebody's property or house or business. I didn't support solar farms being used. That was one suggested that I should put as an exception. But it allows it to be used for public utilities. Southern Delivery System, we've exercised the power, and really it hasn't been a standard how we do it. Sometimes we have a discussion in closed session and then we vote on it a couple weeks later, or maybe we don't need to because we can take that as a threat from the closed session discussion and go negotiate further, and then maybe we don't even have to vote on it. So that's how it's worked. This ordinance will take that whole process and make it standard, and it will make it public, and it will make it transparent. But the ordinance also allows it for blight. It's a very narrow definition of blight. It doesn't allow wholesale designations of blighted areas, the boundaries of which are determined by the very people who want to develop on it. It's determined on a lot-by-lot basis of blight. And it very specifically says it can't be done for the purpose of additional tax revenue or economic development, reinforces the Colorado statute. And if it is exercised, it prevents the city from using eminent domain to acquire property and then transferring it to a private entity for 10 years. This is another problem that's happened in California. It's happened in Los Angeles, where the Community Redevelopment Authority in California, they blighted 27 acres to build a brand new economic development zone, and that property was then transferred to a private developer, and at least some of those parcels were sold for profit from the developer. So now I've got the use of eminent domain that's a public purpose. I take the land from people, and most of those were poor, I'll say. They were poor neighborhoods who couldn't possibly have afforded to defend themselves against the power and the money that was involved in those projects. And that property was then taken by the city of Los Angeles, transferred to a developer, who then later sold it for tremendous profits. So the transfer provision is very important. I talked about this a little bit, very narrow guidelines for defining blight and how it can be designated. It also gives the owner the opportunity to correct blight findings. Gives them 6 months to fix it. So it isn't just, I get a consultant report that says my property is blighted and there's nothing I can do about it. The ordinance now allows me to go and correct. Okay, well, if I have structural elements or one of the specific criteria that are in the ordinance, I have the opportunity to go and fix it. I put in 6 months. One of the recommended changes that I rejected was change that to 30 days. Some of these things can be expensive. So I thought 6 months is appropriate. It gives the owner the opportunity to correct those findings within 6 months, and then if they don't, there's a monetary value. So I can't blight somebody's house and then use eminent domain to take it if it's a $1,500 paint job. We have city code enforcement that can be used at that point, but we can't just up and take the property and call it blighted. So that's why that threshold is there. And all of these things were put in place based on experiences from the Institute for Justice and the help I received from them and what they've seen in those 10,000 cases of abuse that they have reported and that they're defending all over the country. These are things that they found would help to prevent those abuses here in Colorado Springs. And frankly, the fact that it hasn't occurred here and council doesn't vote regularly on it, I think is great, but let's not ever let it happen. Let's put this in place to put restrictions on it, and so that that loaded weapon won't be used. The other thing it does, this ordinance, is it talks about the due process required by the Fifth Amendment. So there's different ways that we can do it. This spells it out. If we're going to take someone's property, we can now have a public process. If they're going to have, if they're going to be deprived of their property, they'll receive public notice by certified mail, and no sooner than 30 days, no later than 60 days, they will get a public hearing. So it'll be a special public hearing for the use of eminent domain to bring it out into the public, to have them have the opportunity or someone that represents them come and speak on their behalf in front of council before that happens. It also requires a supermajority of council at each reading of the ordinance allowing for eminent domain. There's no emergency ordinance. That was the suggestion of the city attorney's office because I wanted more public process. So one public hearing, an ordinance requires 2 readings, so that's really 3 opportunities that the public and the person whose property is being taken will have the opportunity to speak and defend their right to their property. So the reason for the supermajority is, again, that came from experience from the Institute for Justice, because in a lot of these areas, when they weren't able to acquire, the interests who wanted to acquire were able to get a simple majority on the council to make sure that they did it. You're going to probably hear from a lot of people who give a lot of money to campaigns today, and they want to have this strategic tool in the toolbox, this proverbial loaded weapon. So that is the reason for a supermajority. One of the things that government officials don't like, and you'll see in that packet, there was a lot of input from different staff agencies about things that they were concerned about with this. And really, I respect that, because from a staff point of view, your job is how do you make government work, easily and efficiently from a bureaucracy standpoint. So some of the things I saw were, we want to be able to do things in an easy, this is going to make it very difficult to use eminent domain. And that's what I got on the very first meeting with the city attorney's office. This is going to make it really hard to use eminent domain. And my response was, absolutely, that's the whole point. That's why I'm bringing this forward. It should be hard. If we're going to deprive somebody of life, liberty, or property, it should be very hard for the government that we elected to do it. We've heard it a few times. It removes a tool from the toolbox. It handcuffs the city. It may delay contracts for construction contracts. So now we're going to, if we have to have this long public process, one of the concerns I heard is it's going to delay us being able to move quickly on construction projects. So we don't want to delay construction projects, so let's just take the due process out of it and narrow the timeline that it has to happen. This is another direct quote. There's already adequate time for property owners to have due process in court. So I'm reading my paper on my porch, and I have no idea, but there could be a blight study going on in my neighborhood, and now, a few weeks later, I might find myself in court or in front of council having to defend why I deserve to keep my property. To say that there's adequate protection for a property owner to have due process is like saying you have plenty of due process in a criminal court if you're mugged at gunpoint. It's the same sort of thing. The due process needs to be set forth ahead of time. Here's a quote from the current urban renewal plan in Southwest Downtown. In the event the authority adopts a redevelopment proposal which encompasses a non-owned property, so this is a property they'd like to acquire, the authority shall notify the owners of such non-owned property in writing of the possibility of acquisition of their property by condemnation. Upon presentation of evidence by the selected redeveloper that good faith negotiations with the owners of the non-owned property have not resulted in purchase agreements. And you're going to see some examples of those good faith negotiations with one particular property owner. The use of condemnation may be authorized by the authority subject to approval by Colorado Springs City Council. So again, the URA authorizes it, council approves it. The current plan has in it a 36-month moratorium. And I went downstairs in January and saw a number of people standing outside the conference room down there who were waiting for an executive session to be over. And I asked them why they were there. They were concerned that the new Southwest Downtown Urban Renewal Plan, when it comes out to reset the clock for City for Champions, would remove that, because they worked hard to get that into the 2001 Urban Renewal Plan to prevent that immediate possession from taking place. One of the things that we keep hearing is, what are you doing to help business? And again, this will be a hardship for developers who want to use eminent domain, who want to use the government to be able to reduce their land acquisition costs and And that would definitely help them. But the other businesses who are on the receiving end, like those 25 Asian businesses, like businesses in, like Dillard's, like businesses in another area of Denver, in another urban renewal area, they're negatively affected because they've invested time, they've invested money, they've invested their lives into their businesses. And now if somebody else comes along, they could find some condition of blight and they could be having their businesses taken away. And fair market value at that point is really not fair market value, because how it's determined is based on what would the real estate market say. It says nothing about people have been coming to this business for 25 years. They know where to get this product or that product, and now it's gone. So if you know your property could be seized from some small business, you might see businesses leave the area. And this is exactly what happened in Southwest downtown when in 2001 the urban renewal plan came into place. Businesses that were there left because they saw that they would probably be removed whether or not they wanted to go. And so it had the opposite effect of creating development. Everyone bailed because they knew their property wasn't safe anymore, and nor were their property rights. Just like it's hard to find somebody that's going to invest in a country that nationalizes assets, it's pretty hard to invest in property as a business owner when the city could come in and effectively cityize your business property. So what this ordinance will do is it'll tell businesses, we respect your investment, we're going to respect your investment, we're not going to take your property because there's a better idea that comes along. The particular case that I've mentioned a few times is for one property owner in Southwest downtown. And frankly, he didn't want to sell the property at all. And the only way I was able to find this guy is through some work with the El Paso County Assessor's site, and you're going to hear from another citizen about the history of it. But it started with a letter from the Urban Renewal Authority stating that his property was wanted, the intent was there to acquire it, and here was the offer that was going to come. Please sign on the dotted line if you're interested. I don't know if it was a signature or contact somebody. And here's the attachment describing the eminent domain process. So again, the loaded weapon in that fair negotiation. He didn't want to sell. He had no interest in selling for any price. And then he receives a letter in 2008 from the developer's attorney. And I've talked about that before, culminating in the immediate possession. They possess, they hand it over to the developer. You are in court wondering what you're going to get. So if that is fair negotiation, then I don't know what country that we live in anymore. And this is an ongoing process. So there was another, on this, where this property exists, there was another blight study that was done, or a condition survey, pardon me, and the property owner was never notified. In fact, the results of the blight study were given in January at an Urban Renewal Authority meeting, and the certified mail copy, the card, was received by the property owner in February. So to say that we've got due process and everything's working really well, I don't care if it's one case. If there's one case, it could happen to any number of cases. We're talking about economic opportunity zones at South Nevada, or South Academy and North Nevada. Those could very well be part of an urban renewal area at some point. So this will only grow. This possibility will only grow, and the ordinance puts a stop to that kind of coercive and unfair negotiations for property owners. So I would ask that you consider approval of the ordinance to set the example for Colorado and to give property owners and business owners alike in Colorado Springs assurances that their rights to life, liberty, and property will not be stepped upon.